It was a quiet, chilly evening when Sarah sat down on her bed, the soft hum of the television filling the silence in her apartment. She had been busy all day, running errands, meeting with friends, and trying to keep her mind off the small, creeping thoughts that had been bothering her lately. But tonight, as she relaxed with a cup of tea in her hands, she found herself staring at her phone. There was nothing unusual about the phone, except for the fact that it felt like it had been vibrating more than usual. Sarah unlocked the screen and noticed a message that caught her off guard. It was from her. The message was addressed to herself. "Don't forget to call Mom. She's waiting for you." Sarah frowned. She hadn't sent that message, at least not recently. Her mom was fine. She had spoken to her just a couple of hours ago. Sarah was confused but didn't think much of it. Her phone sometimes had a mind of its own, glitching out or sending texts she didn't remember typing. It wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. But then her screen flickered again. Another message appeared. "Check the back door. It's unlocked." This one felt different. The message was short, unsettling. Sarah never left her back door unlocked. And yet, there it was, a message urging her to check it. A wave of unease washed over her, but she decided to dismiss it. Perhaps it was just a strange coincidence, or another glitch. She ignored the message and returned her attention to the TV. Her phone buzzed again, and this time her heart skipped a beat. "Don't leave the kitchen light on when you leave." The words were chilling. She hadn't left the kitchen light on. She hadn't even been in the kitchen for hours. Was it some kind of prank? Or was she imagining things? She felt her pulse quicken, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. It was as if the phone knew something that she didn't. A sense of dread began to settle in her chest. She hurriedly unlocked her phone to check her recent messages, but the ones she had just received were gone. Only the last one remained, a single sentence. "Don't turn around." The words were simple, yet they sent a cold shiver down her spine. Sarah froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes scanned the room, but everything appeared normal. She slowly turned her head to look over her shoulder, her heart pounding in her chest. The apartment was dark, with only the faint glow of the TV illuminating the room. But there was something about the silence that made her skin crawl. Sarah shook her head, trying to shake off the feeling of paranoia that was creeping over her. It was just a weird message, nothing more. Maybe she was overthinking things. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But the longer she sat there, the more she couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. The phone buzzed again, and Sarah jumped. She looked down, expecting another cryptic message, but this time it was a call. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Her thumb hesitated over the screen. Something about the call felt wrong. But before she could decide, it stopped ringing. The phone went quiet. The silence in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. Sarah stared at the darkened screen of her phone for a long moment, unsure of what to do. She thought about calling her mom, but she was already asleep by now. Sarah glanced over her shoulder again. The room was still empty. There was nothing there. No one hiding in the shadows. Yet the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her. She stood up slowly, her hand gripping the edge of the table for support. The air felt colder now, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in just a few minutes. She couldn't explain it, but her instincts told her to move quickly, to check the back door. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and headed toward the kitchen. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, each one louder than the last. She tried to push the unease out of her mind, telling herself it was nothing more than nerves. When she reached the back door, she stopped. The door was closed, but there was a faint draft, a slight movement in the air that suggested it had been opened recently. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand against the door, feeling the coolness on the other side. It was locked. Her mind raced, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She turned to head back to the living room, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand when it buzzed again. Another message. This time it was just 2 words. Turn around. Without thinking, she spun on her heels, her pulse pounding in her ears. The room was empty, as it had been when she last checked. But there, in the corner of the room, was a shadow, a figure. At first, she thought it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, but then she saw it move. It was as if the shadow was alive, creeping across the room toward her. Her breath caught in her throat, and the phone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Sarah couldn't move, her body frozen in place, her mind screaming for her to run. But it was too late. The shadow was closer now, its form becoming clearer with each passing second. It was a figure, tall and thin, its face obscured by darkness. She could feel its presence, suffocating and oppressive, closing in on her. The phone buzzed one last time. Don't turn around. But it was too late for that. Before she could react, the figure was upon her, The last thing Sarah felt was a cold, bone-chilling touch on her shoulder, and then everything went dark. In the morning, the apartment was silent. The phone sat on the floor, its screen cracked, the messages still visible. But Sarah was gone, as if she had vanished into thin air. The only thing left behind was the eerie feeling of something having been there, something dark and unnatural. And the final message still lingered on the screen. Don't turn around. Days passed since Sarah disappeared. No one had heard from her, and the apartment remained eerily silent. The police had investigated, but there was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of foul play. It was as if she had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the unsettling messages on her phone. Friends and family searched for her in vain, hoping to find any clue that could explain what had happened. But the only thing they found was an empty apartment and a single phone that seemed to have a life of its own. At first, the messages had seemed like strange coincidences, anomalies in the phone system. But as time passed, the messages became more and more chilling, each one foretelling something that would happen in the near future, something that Sarah never could have predicted. It was as if someone or something was watching, guiding, and manipulating her every move. The first warning had been innocuous enough, a simple reminder to call her mom. It seemed harmless at the time, but it wasn't until the next message appeared that Sarah began to feel uneasy. Check the back door. It's unlocked. At that moment, Sarah felt the creeping sensation of being watched, of being manipulated. She didn't understand how the phone knew she hadn't locked the door. But there it was. A subtle, unsettling truth. She had never left the back door unlocked. That was her routine, her habit. Yet, the message was undeniable. The back door indeed was unlocked. How had it known? The questions began to pile up one after the other, as Sarah found herself gripped by an overwhelming sense of paranoia. How much of what was happening was coincidence? How much of it was the work of something else? Something more sinister? Her thoughts were interrupted when another message arrived, more cryptic than the last. Don't leave the kitchen light on when you leave. It wasn't that Sarah had left the kitchen light on. She hadn't even been in the kitchen in hours. But the words stuck with her, gnawing at her, until she couldn't ignore them any longer. She had to check. She had to be sure. And yet when she went to the kitchen, the light was off. It was as if nothing had changed. Nothing was out of place. But the feeling in her gut told her that something wasn't right. The final message, the one that would haunt her to the core, was the most chilling of all. Don't turn around. Those words would echo in her mind long after the phone's screen went dark. There was no rational explanation for them, no reason to believe that anything could be behind her. And yet, when she turned her head to look, there was something, a shadow, flickering at the edge of her vision, something that wasn't there before. Her breath hitched. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier. The silence in the room grew unbearable as she stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. It was as if time had slowed down, as if the very fabric of reality had been distorted. Her heartbeat was the only sound she could hear, pulsing in her ears as she stared at the dark corner of the room. She had to move, had to escape, but her body refused to cooperate. The terror paralyzed her. It was at that moment, when she was at her most vulnerable, that the final message appeared. Turn around. Sarah spun on her heels, her heart hammering in her chest, her eyes wide with fear. The room was still empty, still silent. But the shadow was there. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It wasn't just a figment of her imagination. The figure stood in the corner, tall and thin, its face obscured by the darkness. It didn't move, didn't speak, but Sarah could feel its presence. Its gaze was fixed on her, as if it were waiting for her to make the first move. The phone slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor with a dull thud. She didn't care. She couldn't care. The figure was coming closer now, its shape becoming clearer with each step. Sarah tried to back away, to run, but her legs wouldn't respond. The terror held her in place, frozen, as if she were a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming car. The figure reached out, its fingers long and pale, reaching for her with a slow, deliberate motion. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but no sound escaped her lips. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in as the figure drew near. She could feel the coldness of its touch even before it reached her, could feel the chill in the air as it moved through the space. And then everything went dark. When Sarah's friends and family arrived at her apartment later that evening, they found the door ajar, the apartment in disarray, and her phone lying on the floor, cracked and abandoned. It was as though she had been there one moment and then gone the next. The eerie silence of the apartment hung in the air like a thick fog. Her personal items were scattered about, her coat still hanging on the back of the chair where she had left it. But there was no sign of Sarah. The police came and went, searching the apartment for any evidence of foul play. But there was nothing. No sign of a struggle, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. The only clue they found was the phone and the messages. Don't forget to call Mom. Check the back door. It's unlocked. Don't leave the kitchen light on when you leave. Don't turn around. Turn around. The messages were all there, clear as day, written in Sarah's name. But no one could explain how they had gotten there. No one could explain why she had disappeared. Months passed. The case went cold. Sarah's friends and family were left with nothing but questions and a lingering sense of dread. Her apartment remained vacant, untouched by new tenants. It stood as a monument to the strange disappearance of a woman who had simply vanished from her own life. But the phone remained. It was found months later, buried beneath a pile of forgotten paperwork, discarded as nothing more than a strange relic from a life that no longer existed. The phone was still intact, its screen cracked but functional. The messages were still there, scrolling endlessly, as if they were part of some unseen pattern, some larger design. And the last message, the one that had haunted Sarah, the one that had terrified her to the core, was still there, waiting. Don't turn around. No one knew who had sent the messages. No one knew why Sarah had disappeared. But as the phone lay dormant on the table, a chilling thought lingered in the air. What if Sarah had never really left? What if she was still there, trapped somewhere in the apartment, somewhere in the dark? The thought was enough to make the blood run cold, and in the silence of the abandoned apartment, the shadow waited. The apartment remained vacant for weeks after Sarah's disappearance. No one had moved in, and the strange stillness of the place persisted, the air heavy with unanswered questions. The police had all but given up on finding an explanation, and Sarah's family was left with little more than grief and an ever-growing sense of dread. The phone, the only clue that remained, had been abandoned in a drawer, its cracked screen no longer receiving the strange messages, but still holding its terrifying secret. But as time passed, the whispers began. First, it was just a rumor, an odd story passed between friends. Someone had said they had heard strange noises coming from Sarah's apartment late at night. Another person swore they saw shadows moving behind the windows long after the sun had set. And then there were those who claimed to have received mysterious text messages on their phones, messages that seemed to come from nowhere, messages that felt like they were being sent from someone who was not quite alive. As these whispers spread through the community, people began to avoid the apartment building altogether. It was as if an invisible barrier had descended, a curse that had taken hold of the place. No one dared to venture too close to the entrance, and the few who did speak of it would do so in hushed tones, as if the building itself might hear and respond. But one evening, nearly a year after Sarah's disappearance, the apartment's door opened. It was not a loud, dramatic opening, but a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. The wind pushed against it, and the door creaked softly, as if something within had been waiting for the right moment to be free. A man named David, a newcomer to the area, had recently rented a unit in the building. He had heard the stories, of course, everyone had. But he wasn't one to believe in superstitions or ghosts. He was a practical man, someone who preferred facts over folklore. So when he had found the apartment for a reasonable price, he had signed the lease without hesitation, dismissing the talk of hauntings and disappearances as nothing more than urban legend. He had moved in quietly, alone, and had settled into a routine. It wasn't until that night, when the wind picked up and the temperature dropped, that he first noticed something strange. It started with a tapping sound, a soft and rhythmic noise coming from behind the walls. David assumed it was just the building settling, the natural creaks and groans that came with old structures. But then it grew louder, faster. The tapping became more urgent, almost frantic, as though someone or something was trying to get his attention. David sat up in bed, his eyes wide in the dim light. He had been reading, trying to ignore the gnawing unease that seemed to have settled in his chest. But now, as the tapping continued, he couldn't ignore it any longer. He got out of bed, his heart racing, and walked cautiously toward the source of the noise. The tapping led him to the door of Sarah's old apartment. He hesitated before touching the doorknob, the cold metal sending a jolt of discomfort through his fingers. The door, which had been firmly shut since Sarah's disappearance, was now ajar, just wide enough for a sliver of light to spill into the hallway. It was as if the apartment itself were beckoning him, calling him to step inside. David felt a strange pull, a magnetic force drawing him closer. He reached out, his breath shallow, and pushed the door open. The apartment was dark, empty, and still. The air inside was thick with dust, the remnants of a life that had once been full of light and warmth. The furniture was gone, the walls bare, but there was something unmistakably unsettling about the place. It felt as if time had stopped here, as though the apartment itself had been frozen in a moment of dread. David stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he walked deeper into the apartment, he felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He couldn't explain it, but it was as if he wasn't alone. The weight of unseen eyes bore down on him, watching, waiting. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the empty spaces, until his gaze fell upon the floor near the window. There, partially buried beneath a pile of discarded papers, was Sarah's phone. It lay still, as though it had been waiting for him. He picked it up cautiously, turning it over in his hands. The screen was cracked, the glass spider-webbed across its surface, but it was still functional. As he held it, the faintest vibration ran through his fingertips. David unlocked the phone. The first message appeared. "Don't forget to call Mom." David's heart skipped a beat. The message was old, almost forgotten, but there it was, on the screen in front of him. He quickly scrolled down, his fingers trembling. The messages were all there, just as Sarah had seen them. "Check the back door, it's unlocked. Don't leave the kitchen light on when you leave. Don't turn around. Turn around." His pulse quickened. He couldn't believe it. How was this possible? These messages had been sent long before he had even moved into the building, and yet here they were, on Sarah's phone, as clear and as chilling as the day they were written. He looked around the apartment again, his unease growing with each passing second. Suddenly the phone buzzed. David froze, staring at the screen. The phone vibrated once, twice, and then slowly another message appeared. "Don't turn around." David felt his stomach drop. The message was so familiar, so foreboding, that he couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. He stood there, locked in place, as the phone continued to vibrate in his hand. Then, against his better judgment, he did it. He turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was Sarah. But she wasn't the Sarah he remembered. She was different. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and hollow, as if the life had been drained from her long ago. Her skin was cold, unnaturally so, and her hair hung in matted strands around her face. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her presence filled the room, suffocating David with an overwhelming sense of terror. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't obey him. He could only stare at her, his breath shallow as she took a single step forward. The phone buzzed again. The last message. "Turn around." David didn't hesitate this time. He turned back to face the phone, but it was too late. In the reflection of the cracked screen, he saw her. Sarah's figure loomed behind him, her cold, dead eyes fixed on him with a haunting intensity. And then everything went black. The next morning, the apartment was empty once again. The door was closed, and the phone lay silently on the floor, its screen shattered, the last message unread. David was gone, just like Sarah had been. The building stood in silence, waiting, its secret still buried within its walls. No one knew what had happened to David, just as no one knew what had happened to Sarah. But the whispers continued, spreading through the neighborhood, growing stronger with each passing day. People spoke in hushed tones of the cursed apartment, of the phone that sent messages from the past, of the figure that watched from the shadows. And in the darkness, the figure waited, waiting for the next person to enter, waiting for the next message to be sent, waiting for the next soul to be claimed. And so the cycle continued, an endless loop of terror with no escape. The apartment was never truly empty. It had always been waiting,